Alright, in this course, we are going to learn so much about Flutter. First, we are going to learn about how to create a new Flutter project in our famous IDE, and also using command line. Next, we're going to talk about the automatic generated files and folders after creating our project in Flutter. After that, we will analyze the default counter app, which will be created whenever we are creating a new Flutter project. Then we are going to start ourselves to code and create our first Flutter app. After that, we will get to know about some basics widgets in Flutter like text, container, buttons, column and rows, icons, etc. Next, we have a challenge app where we are going to use most of the widgets inside of it to create a beautiful Flutter application. At the end, we are going to learn how to format our Flutter code to be more readable to us and for any other developer. We are going to learn how to create a new Flutter application using our famous IDEs and command line. First, we go with the Visual Studio Code, and we need to make sure to have installed already the Flutter and Dart plugins here. Then we need to open the command palette using the Ctrl-Shift-P on Windows and Command-Shift-P on macOS. Then type Flutter New Project and press Enter. After that, click on this option to generate a new Flutter application. Next, select a path location where we want to save our project. And then we need to give a project name and press Enter to create our Flutter application. Next, we go with the Android Studio. Therefore, make sure to have installed already the Flutter and Dart plugins here. Then select the new Flutter project and choose the Flutter SDK path here. After that, we go to the next page and give a name to our project, which this should be in lowercase with an underscore between each of the words of our project name. Here we choose a specific path location where our project will be saved. Then we click on the Finish button to create our counter Flutter application. The last way is using command line, therefore. First, we use cd command to navigate into some folder on our system where we want to create that project, and then we can run the Flutter create command with a specific name to create a new Flutter project. And after pressing the Enter, it will create a folder in that path where we navigated before, which contains all the initial Flutter project files. And then again, we can use the Visual Studio Code or Android Studio to open that folder of our Flutter project. After creating a new project, the Flutter framework automatically generates some files and folders by default, in which a lot of these files and folders you see here are only for configuration and do not need to be touched by you. But let me explain what each folder and file does here. Let's go from top to bottom. The Dart Tools folder, which is new in Dart version 2, it is used by Pub and other tools. Pub is the package manager for Dart language, and we don't need to change anything here inside this folder. The idea folder holds some configuration for Android Studio. It doesn't really matter for us here because we are not using Android Studio. Therefore, we don't need to change anything here. The Android folder contains the Android platform-specific settings, resources, and codes. And we don't need to change anything here, but very rarely we are required to make the platform-specific code or changes here. The iOS folder, same as Android folder, contains iOS-specific settings, resources, and codes which we don't need to change anything, but only when we are required to make the platform-specific code or changes here. The lib folder is the most important folder for us. Lib stands for library, and this is the folder where we will do 99% of our work. It is the folder where we will add all our Dart files. Dart is the programming language Flutter uses to write the code for our Flutter application. Linux and macOS folders, same as Android and iOS folders, contain the platform-specific settings, resources, and codes, which we do not need to change anything on these folders. The test folder stores the test files for our Flutter application. These test files help us to write automated tests for our Flutter application. And as a beginner, don't care about it for now. The Web and Windows folders, also the same as the other platform folders that we mentioned in the above, they contain the platform-specific settings, resources, and codes, which we don't need to change anything here also. Gitignore is a file that helps us when we are using Git. Git allows us to create snapshots of our code, save them, and go back to them at a later point of time. The metadata file is not really a file we will work in. It will be managed automatically by Flutter. And in the end, the Flutter tool simply saves some information in here, which it does need to build our application correctly. The same is true for the packages file. This is generated automatically by the Flutter SDK, and at the end, it just manages some internal dependencies and packages which this project needs. The analysis options file configures the analyzer, which statically analyzes Dart code to check for errors, warnings, and lints in our IDE. This file is also not really a file which we will work on, and it also just manages some internal dependencies and packages which this project needs. The pubspec lock file is a file that generated automatically based on our pubspec.yaml file here, and this simply holds more details about all the dependencies we have, and it is required by Flutter, but it's not a file we will work on. The pubspec.yaml file is basically a config file that allows us to configure how our application works or which external dependencies it has. And the README file is an automatically generated file. It holds some information about our project, and we could change this here if we were sharing our project with other developers whom we want to give some information about it. It's time to really dive into the code. And for that, let's look into the only Dart file we have here in our lib folder. And as I mentioned, this is the folder in which we will write our entire application. Therefore, this file holds all the codes that renders our application onto the screen. But how does it do that? Because overall, this is a pretty lean file and it doesn't have that much code. These green lines here are comments, and it is just there for you to explain what happens thereafter. We will rewrite this file to create an application from scratch. But now I want to briefly go through it so that you can understand how such a Flutter application works and what Flutter does for you. Flutter is both a tool set and a framework for the Dart language, and a Flutter app is an application where we can build a UI by adding widgets. Widgets are components, the building blocks of our user interface, like this button here in the bottom right corner, or this app bar in the top of our application with its title here, or even these two texts in the middle of the application are widgets. Flutter is all about widgets, and even if you don't really understand Dart and Flutter, it probably makes sense that these two text pieces here are responsible for giving us these texts on the screen. Or even this floating action button thing with a plus icon can be responsible for this circular button at the bottom right corner of the screen. So indeed, this is how it works, and these are widgets which we did not create ourselves, but these are built into Flutter SDK, and we can use them to put some texts onto the screen or to add a button. And of course, we got way more widgets than these two different kind of widgets, which we will learn about them in the upcoming lessons. Now it's the time to remove all of these codes and start to write our very first Flutter application from scratch. So here we have the material package, which imports all predefined widgets created by the Flutter and Google team, so that we have all the basic UI components to create a user interface with Flutter. Next, we have our main method, which is the entry point of the Flutter application. So here inside the run app method, instead of my app, we define the material app, which is generally used at the root of all of our Flutter apps. Now, as you can see, we can start building up our tree of widgets. So inside the material app, the most important thing is you get to set is the home, and this is where everything starts. Within this basic structure, we create then a text widget that just says, "Hello world." Then now if we go ahead and just run the app, we can see our text show up inside our material app in the top left corner. Now we want to show our text at the center of the screen. So inside the material app, instead of having a text widget, we are going to have a center widget. And the center widget can have a child as well, and its child is going to be our text widget. So now when I run the app, you will see that my hello world gets automatically moved into the center of the screen. Next, we are going to make our simple app a little prettier in the look. Therefore, we use the scaffold widget in our material app, which will provide our app with the material's basic visual layout structure. Now we can add a body for our scaffold, which is one of its important property. And then we can have our hello world text at the center of the screen. Now let's reload the app again, and you will see instead of having a black page, we have a white page with our text at the center of our screen. Inside our scaffold, we're going to add an app bar, which is a pre-built material design, and it adds a top bar to our app. Therefore, in its app bar property, we can add an app bar widget, which takes title as a property, and we can add a text on it. Now, if we reload the app again, you can see an app bar at the top of our app with its title. Now it's time to reformat our code using our favorite IDEs, which can be easily readable for us or for others who read the code. So first we go with the Android Studio, and we should make sure to have installed the Dart plugin already here in our IDE. And now, for example, our code is like this, which is so messed up and not readable for us. So we can use the key combination of Control-Alt-L on Windows and Command-Alt-L on Mac, and it will reformat our code in Android Studio like this. There is one another easy way to reformat our code. For that, we need to go to File and open the Settings dialog. Then, from the Open dialog under the Languages and Frameworks, we go to the Flutter. And here in the Editor section, we check the Format Code on Save option, then click on the OK button. Now, whenever we save our code using Ctrl-S, you can see that our code will be reformatted. We can even do more by adding the trailing comma after each widget and save our code. Then you will see that our code is formatted and everything is more readable. And now same in VS Code. First, we need to make sure to have installed the Dart extension already here in our IDE. Then we can use the key combination Ctrl-Alt-L on Windows and Command-Alt-L on Mac to reformat our code like this. Or we can go to this website and use this recommended settings. Therefore, first we copy that, and inside the VS Code press Ctrl-Shift-P to open the command palette. Then here type Dart, use recommended settings and press Enter. After that, we can open the settings file from here and paste the recommended settings inside and make sure to put the format on save to true. And after that, save this file. Now, whenever we save our code, you can see that our code will be formatted automatically. Here, as you can see, we have already 2 different text widgets in our application. Therefore, every application that you create has to have a text in it. To create a text, we need to simply use the text widget and pass a string of the text as its first property. And this gives us with the simplest form of text for our application, which looks something like this. But Flutter is all about UI, and we might need to format this text in different ways to make it more appealing. For this, text widget has a style property which takes the instance of text style. Text style is quite a detailed class on its own. The most basic property in text style is font size, which requires a double value. In this case, I will just pass a value of 30.0, and if we reload the app, we can see that the text is definitely become bigger. And I would also like the font weight to be a little bit bolder. So to do that, I can use up property which is called font weight, and I can set it to font weight.bold, for example, and as we can see, the thickness of the text has now increased. The next property which I would like to introduce is the color property, which I can set it to a different colors like blue to change the text color of our text widget. One thing that I want to say in the last is that you can just press the Control key and click on the text style. And the text style has a number of interesting properties that you can use to tweak the way text you just look in your app. So you can spend some time learning more about text style and all its properties. Now in this lesson, I want to talk about one of the most fundamental widgets that we are going to be using all the time to lay out our apps. And that is the container widget. A container widget, for those guys who have done a little bit of web development, it's very similar to a div. It's essentially just a layout box. You can position it, move it around on the screen, and then you can give it a child to display, such as an image or a piece of text. So a container is a widget that allows us to position other widgets and size other widgets. One of the most important things about the container is that containers with no children try to be as big as possible. And this is exactly what we are seeing over here. We have a container that is currently trying to be as big as possible, but how do we know that? Well, let's change its color. And here we get to specify a color for our container. For example, we can define a teal color for it. So now when I hot reload the app, we can see my entire screen changes to teal. But when we give it a child, like a piece of text that just says hello world, and reload our app, we can see that immediately our container shrinks to the size of the child widget. What else we can do with our container? Well, we can also change its size, like in its width property. We can change its width to 200 points, or even with its height property, we can give a specific height for it. So now we should have a 200 by 200 square container as soon as I reload the app. Now I can use the margin property for our container to just have a little bit offset from the edges of the screen. And to specify the margin property, we have to use something called edge insets. And as you can see, there is different types of insetting an edge. We can use the all method, which means that whatever we enter here, let's say 30, is going to be set for all 4 sides of our container. So there is now, as you can see, a little margin of 30 for all sides of our container. Now we use the padding property to have a little offset from the edges for the child of our container. So for the padding, it also expects edge insets. So this time we go with the symmetric method, and we can define different padding vertically and even different padding horizontally to our container. Now if I reload the app, we can see I've got a container, and I have got its content pushed away from the edges of the container. So I can say margin is for the outside of our widget, and padding is for the inside of our widget. In this lesson, we're going to talk about different types of buttons in Flutter. Let's get started with this simple button called elevated button, which has 2 required properties. The child, which gets a widget like a simple text in it, and the onPressed, which is a callback function and represents an action to be executed when the button is tapped. And in this case, we can just print a statement on the console. Now, if I restart our app and click on the elevated button, it prints our statement on the debug console. Next, we want to customize the style of our button. Therefore, in its style property, we simply take the name of our button followed by the style from. And then here inside, we can define the size of our button. So we can define here width and also the height of our button. And right now, if we restart our app, you can see our elevated button size has changed. Next to it, we can define the text style of our button. So I make the font size a bit bigger. And after restarting our app, we have a bigger text in our button. We also can change the background and foreground color of our button. So we define here primary, which is the background color, in this case orange. And we also define onPrimary, which is the foreground color, in this case, this black text color. Next, we have text button. Therefore, we should change here our elevated button style to the text button. The text button doesn't have any background color. Therefore, it does not support the onPrimary property here. So simply we can remove it from here, but we can change its primary color to green here. Now, if we restart our app, we see that we have a button with no background color, but a green primary color with the same size of our button and the same font size. Another useful button in Flutter is the outline button. So here we need to change the button style to the outlined button. And now if we restart our app, we see we have a button with a border around, and by default, it has not any background color. To customize our outline border, we have a side property, and inside the border side, we first can define its color like blue, and then the width of our button border. And if we restart our app now, we can see we have a 3-pixel blue border around our button here. So as we have learned before, a container is used to lay out a single widget, such as a piece of text. But what if we have lots of different widgets that we want to lay out relative to each other? The easiest way to do this is using columns and rows, so that we can lay out our widgets in a vertical direction or a horizontal direction and determine how they should be sized. Now let's get started, and inside our scaffold body, create a column. And since we can have more than one child inside a column, we do not have a child property anymore. Instead, we have a children which can get a list of items. It means we can put lots of widgets in between these square brackets. Therefore, we can put 3 different containers inside our column. So now we have 3 containers, all with different colors and sizes, that it's being laid out in a vertical direction. As you can see currently, our column is laying out its children from top to bottom, but we can change its vertical direction. We can either change it to go up, which means it goes from the bottom to the top, or we can change it as down, which is the default, where it goes from the top to bottom. Now we want to change the spacing between the containers. Well then, we should use something called main axis alignment. And by default, all of our containers are aligned to the start. And this will try and place the children as close to the start of the main axis as possible. However, we can also change it to the end, and then our containers will all be bunched down here towards the end of our main axis. Or even we can also move it to the center. Now, what if we want our containers to be spread out a bit more? Well, we can use something that is called space evenly. And this will calculate the amount of free space that the column has, and it will space all of our children evenly throughout the column. But what if we wanted something to be at the start and something to be at the bottom, and then the another one at the center? Well, we should use space between instead. Now, what if we wanted to change the way that our containers are aligned on the horizontal axis? Well, in this case, we will be using something called the cross-axis alignment. Now here I also have access to the start cross-axis alignment, which moves the containers to the left side, and also end cross-axis alignment, which moves our containers to the right side. Now, what if we wanted to stretch all our containers so that they fill the entire width? The easiest way is just remove all the width properties from containers, and instead of using cross-axis alignment end, we can use cross-axis alignment stretch. And this will stretch children so that they can be the best version of themselves. Now, everything that I have spoken about columns also apply to rows. So in fact, I can straight up just change our column to a row and give a specific width instead of height to each of our containers, and you will see it does exactly the same thing on the horizontal axis. As you can see, for a row, the cross-axis alignment is vertical alignment. So that's why all of our containers are stretched vertically. And the main axis alignment is, of course, the horizontal alignment. So finally, I can say that the best way of getting to know columns and rows is really to try it out for yourself and deep dive on them to learn more. All right, in this lesson, we are going to talk about how to add an asset image in Flutter. So first of all, we need to go to our root directory, create a new folder, and name it as Assets. Then we can place our images from our system inside the Assets folder. Next, here inside the scaffold body, we use the image widget, which allows us to load images in different ways. And as we are going to load images from our Assets folder, therefore we choose the asset here. Then we need to add the image path, which is in our Assets folder here. Now, before restarting the app, we need to say inside pubspec file over here that we want to use these images as our assets. Therefore, we will just uncomment that and make sure that it has only 2 spaces from the left. Then under the assets, we will delete these default examples, and we can address our images, which are located in the assets folder. And then after the forward slashes, we can give the name of our specific image. Then we will just save this file and go to the main page. And now, after restarting our app, we can see that we have loaded our image from our assets. Now, if we had a lot of images, like 15 in total here in our assets folder, then it would be waste of time and space to mention all of them here under the assets. So instead, what we could do is just get rid of any specific image name from here and have the assets folder like this, and then we can save it. Now we are allowed to use any of our images from the assets folder. For example, we can just load the image 2 from the asset folder here. Okay, in this lesson, we are going to talk about the card widget in Flutter. Card is a widget that is used to create a rectangular area with 4 rounded corners and a shadow effect on its edges. Now, let's get started and add a card widget in the center of our scaffold body. The card widget has a child property, which we will add a simple text to it. And as you can see now, we have card widget here on the screen, which contains our text. We can do a little customization on our card widget. For example, we can change its background color to green, or we can increase its shadow effect on its edges, which is getting a double value like 20. We can even change its shadow color and give another color like red. Okay, in this video, we're going to create a pretty card view like this, which includes an image, some pieces of texts, and a button. Before we start to create this, let's do a challenge. I want you to pause the video right here and try to create this card view by yourself once. Then you can come back and do it together. Great. First, let's give a grayish background color to our scaffold. Now, in the center of our scaffold body, we create card widget, which is wrapped with a container widget to give a specific height and width to our card. Next, in our card widget, we have a column, which we are going to add our waffle image from our assets folder here. Then we need to wrap our image with a container to give a specific size to it. The image widget has a fit property, which is used how to inscribe the image into the space allocated during layout. Therefore, we use box fit, which has a list of different values, and we are going to use the cover value to just cover all the free spaces we have here. Next, as you can see, we have 2 pieces of text in a row. So first of all, here we add another column. And inside this column, we can add our row widget. Then inside our row, we add our first text and define a text style to increase its font size. Next, we are going to add our price text with the same text style in our row. And as you can see, our text includes a $sign. Therefore, for showing any specific sign like this, we need to use a backslash before it. Now we use main axis alignment to give a space between our text like this. Next, we are going to add our another text. Therefore, we need to add our text outside of our row with a light black color here. And next, we have a button here after our text. Therefore, we use elevated button, which we give a text as its child. Now, we go up to this column which contains this part of our codes and add cross-axis alignment to stretch our button here. And finally, we click on the column widget, then press Alt and Enter key. Then from the opened list, we click on the Wrap with Container to just wrap our column with a container widget. We can define a padding for all 3 sides of our column like this. Okay, in this lesson, we are going to talk about icons and icon buttons. An icon is a graphic image representing an application or any specific entity containing meaning for the user. Now, let's get started. In the center of the body, add an icon widget. So now, we are going to add our icon by the help of the icon data, which as you can see, the Flutter listed a lot of icons out of the box already, which we can use any of them. Like, for now, I'm going to select the home icon. And if we restart our app, you can see that we have a home icon in the center of our application. The next property for the icon is its size, and we are going to resize our icon and make it bigger, like 70. Other property for our icon, which we can define is a color, and we can give it a different color like red. And now after restarting our app, you can see that our icon color has changed to the red. So now what if we want our icon to be pressable or touchable to execute a set of statements? For that, Flutter has another widget called icon button. The icon button acts just like a button with an icon instead of normal button. So now let's go to our app bar widget. App bar has a property called leading, which takes a widget. Then we can add our icon button widget here. The icon button has 2 required properties. First, one is the onPressed, which we can define a function to do some specific task, like print a statement like this. The other one is the icon, which we can define a specific icon like an arrow back icon. The icon button has more properties like icon size for defining a specific size for our icon, or the color property, which is used to change its color like to black. Now, as you see, we have a button which is clickable, and when we click on it, it will do some specific task, like printing a statement as we have here. We're going to learn about ListView and ListTile widget in Flutter. ListView is a scrollable list of widgets arranged linearly. It displays its children one after another in the scroll direction vertically or horizontally. So let's get started, and in the body of our scaffold, create a ListView widget. The ListView has a children property which takes a list of different widgets to show them one after another. So now we are going to add a ListTile widget here inside of our ListView children. And the ListTile is a widget that implements the material design list spec for us. It contains title, subtitle, as well as leading or trailing icons. Okay, Now, let's go for each of property one by one. First, we go with the leading property, which takes a widget, and we are going to add a simple icon with a bigger size like 60, which will be placed in the left side of our screen. The other one is title, and we're going to add a text widget, and it's going to be next to our icon here. The next one, we can go with the subtitle, which here also we are going to add a simple text which shows below of our title in a small size of text with a grayish color. The last one, we can go with the trailing, which takes a widget as property. And here we are going to add a smaller arrow drop down icon, which shows that next to title in the right side of the application. Now, as you see, we have a pretty list tile, which everything is arranged in a perfect way. So now we can add multiple list tile widgets with different title and subtitle like this in our list view, and they will be shown here in our application one after another. As you can see here, we have a list of different list tile widgets, which we can do scrolling till the end of the list view. The next important widget in the Flutter is the GridView widget. As a grid, we can show data in a grid format with rows and columns. Great. Now we can go to our scaffold body and create our GridView widget here. And as you can see, Flutter gives us different types of creating GridView. But for now, we're going with the simplest one and select the count here. Now we need to define the cross-axis count property, which is used to specify the number of columns in our GridView. After that, in its children, here we can define our list of items to show them in a grid format with rows and columns. Therefore, we can have a list of images which we have them in our assets folder here. Now, if we restart our app, you see a list of images which is displayed in a grid format for us. The next property, we can go with main axis spacing, which takes a double value like 12, and it is used to give spaces between each row in our grid list like this. The other one is cross-axis spacing. This also takes a double value like 12, and it is used to give space between each column in our grid list like this. So now, as you can see, we have a pretty and simple grid list in our application. The another important widget in Flutter is the stack widget. It is a widget that allows us to make multiple widgets overlay on the top of each other. This widget takes multiple children and orders them from bottom to top. It means the first item in its children is the bottommost and the last is the topmost. So now for the better understanding, let's get started. And in our scaffold body, we create a stack widget. Then in its children property, we can define 3 different containers, which has different background colors with different sizes. Now, after restarting our app, you can see that our green container is the first item of our stack widget, and it is at the bottom of our other containers. Next, we have our yellow container, which overlaid on top of green container. And so on, you can see our red container is overlaid on top of our yellow container. The stack widget has another important property, which is alignment. And with the help of that, we can change its children position, like we can move it to the center of the screen. So now, as you can see, we have overlaid our containers on the top of each other with the help of stack widget. In this lesson, we are going to talk about single child scroll view widget in Flutter. This widget is a box where we can scroll a single widget like a column. Sometimes in our application, we have lots of different content. For example, we have a column which contains different containers, and we want to show them all in our application. But when we restart our app, you can see that we have an error at the bottom of the screen, and this says that there is not enough room to see the entire content. So what can we do is wrap our column with a new widget, which is called single child scroll view. After we restart our app, you can see we don't have the previous error, and we can scroll our screen to see all the contents of our column widget. Single child scroll view can be applied on the row widget also. For example, we have a row widget which contains lots of different containers like this. And when we restart our app, you can see we have the same error on the right side of the screen. So here also we can wrap our row widget with the single child scroll view, and it has a scroll direction property, which we can define in which direction it should be scrollable. As we now have row here, we should define its scroll direction as it should scroll horizontally. Now if we restart our app, you see that we can scroll our app horizontally to see all the contents of our row widget.